Well, this, I'll probably end up repeating myself as people kind of funnel in, but I had planned to do some digital drawing, then woke up this morning and found I forgot to plug in my tablet. It was down to a 1% charge. So figure drawing it is, which, to be fair, I can never get enough of. So it's not like this is a drag, but it does mean that I will not be paying as much attention to you guys because it involves me turning away and looking at this thing as opposed to looking at the screen while I'm working. Right. But yeah, really just going through some older figure drawings, looking at places where things did not work right, places where I can make corrections and adjustments. Let's see here. I don't want to move the mic so close to the edge it's going to fall off. See, at this point, I can already feel like I'm not capturing the sense of life that the original model took for the drawing that I'm redrawing, which if I loosen my camera mount, I can turn this slightly. And you can see that that's the original drawing over there that I drew during figure drawing class. And now I realize actually this is so far away from the screen, I might as well turn it a little bit closer. It's sort of weird. I've been struggling to find a good place for the camera while doing these streams. The fact of the matter is that putting it kind of right under my chin seems to work best. in terms of giving you guys a clear view of what I'm seeing without getting in my way while I'm trying to work. But either way, the challenge is getting this thing to have a certain amount of energy to it. Not to be photorealistic, but to be lifelike in terms of a drawing that feels, I don't know. I guess animated is maybe the word that I'm thinking of. Like, it doesn't look like real life, but it still feels like it could get up and move, have some life to it. And right now, I don't feel like I'm hitting that. But that's kind of the point of doing these studies, is literally pressing up against the things that I struggle with. I mean, this isn't going to be a nicely rendered portrait. Even the reference I'm working from is rough and loose. And I'm going to make some adjustments here. For instance, I remember the model was laying against a curved surface, but I'm going to straighten it just a little bit. Still be curved, but not as rounded, just to make a little bit of a different shape where the torso, the supporting surface, and her thigh all meet. And I gotta stop using line and get in here with a little bit more tonal marks. The difference between defining a figure with a line versus a nice broad tone. The tone gives me some place to go, to mold into. If I do it light enough, excuse me, if I do it light enough, it becomes something that I can kind of mold like putty or clay. It feels like it has a little bit more rhythm now, at least. But the way that it ends with both feet need a little bit more refinement, a little more work. Let's see here. James in the chat. Good to see you, James. And is the Facebook stream not up? Because I noticed you're watching on YouTube this week. I'm just being nosy. It doesn't matter to me either way. But James says, last week you were saying that skill isn't required for newspaper comics, but does competence matter? I'm thinking mainly of competence in terms of comics since they're a team effort? Well, I guess that begs a follow-up question, which is how would you differentiate competence from skill? That's the first question. And it's not necessarily that I'm saying and let me clarify. It's not that I think that skill does not matter in newspaper strips. It's that it isn't the driving force. Draftsmanship isn't essential compared to the actual storytelling and particularly the humor in newspaper strips. You know, being able to convey your ideas is more important than being able to draw a pretty picture in newspaper strips. And to be honest, a lot of times funny is not necessarily well drawn. You have to draw weird in order to make something that's humorous. Bill Watterson, to be honest, is unusual in terms of how great his draftsmanship in his strip is. Because also, it's another thing. I'm not saying that the artists that did these strips could not draw well. I'm saying that a lot of them, their success was not about how well it was drawn, because that wasn't what was on display. There's plenty of artists that worked in newspaper strips who could draw very well and draw great academic figures, but their strip was cartoony and it was humorous, and it required them to draw in a quote unquote funny way to look amusing, to look entertaining. So when I say that it's not necessary, it doesn't mean it's absent. It just means that it wasn't what was the driving force of their work. But all right, so the follow-up. Let's see here. James says, a collaborative effort. I haven't come across too many green comic book artists and writers. And no, I didn't see the Facebook stream off. You don't need to check. I just happen to be nosy because I'm used to seeing you on Facebook. That's all. It doesn't matter either way. Let's see here. James says, I think it was Neal Adams who said he was a great storyteller, but didn't think of himself as a great artist. Well, that just shows you the humility of Neal Adams, because, I think most people would consider him one of the great illustrators of the medium. And he brought a level of illustration and artistry to comics that wasn't necessarily as evident in the fact that, he even though he actually came out of comic and newspaper strips, but he had an advertising background and did a lot of advertising illustration work. That's mainly what his Continuity Studios did, was advertising work. So the level of illustration that's there was much more in line with Mad Men era, classic commercial newspaper, TV, print ad illustrations. But he also did, I want to say it was Rex Morgan, MD. I know he did a couple of newspaper strips in his time before he really sunk his teeth into the comic book industry. And I can tell you there are many people who are much more knowledgeable and could quote his career chapter and verse. So I definitely love Neal Adams. I've listened to a lot of interviews with him, but I'm not an expert in his body of work. So everything I say, take it with a grain of salt. But he's a perfect example in that I listened to an interview that's the print version is in Will Eisner's book Shop Talk. But the audio version of it is a bonus feature on a Will Eisner documentary DVD. And in it, Neal Adams has said that there's two kinds of artists in the comic book world. Well, there's two types of comic book art. There's Bigfoot and Littlefoot. And Bigfoot is something that is cartoony, Walt Kelly's Pogo, Calvin and Hobbes, Peanuts, cartoon characters with big feet. Then there's Littlefoot, which is superhero, meaning more realistic proportions, more illustrative, closer to real world, just not as cartoony. But the argument that Neal Adams put forth was that in order to be a good, now he's not saying that you can't draw superhero comics without being able to be cartoony, but he said that to be a good comic book artist, to be one of the best, you had to be good at Bigfoot, meaning exaggerated and cartoony work, in order to sell the type of action and superheroic feats that occur in a superhero comic book. In fact, basically that even if the proportions are more human and more realistic, that the action is so over the top, there's so much going on that you need to have the ability to exaggerate it and convincingly sell people on it. I don't know for sure whether I'm 100% on that, but it sounds very reasonable to me. Like, it's one of those things where on instinct I hear it and I think, yeah, that sounds right to me. I've never turned the idea over in my head enough to really think, is there any reason for me to doubt the veracity of that statement? Like, on its surface, it sounds like, yeah, that makes sense. I can believe that. It jives with all of my current beliefs. Well, I'm getting really away from what you're saying about competency in collaborative efforts. So when you say that you haven't come across too many green comic book artists and writers, well, I mean, where are you looking when you're talking about this? Because when I look at, say, Kickstarter, or I look at webcomics, or if I just go to a comic book convention, I see most of the time I see creators that are, very new. They're doing their first book, first-time comic artists, first-time comic writers collaborating together. When I go to conventions or I look at Kickstarter campaigns, that's kind of all I see. So if you're talking about indie comic book circles, I see a lot of green comic book artists and comic book writers. And just because they're new, that doesn't mean that they are going to lack competency. It means that they may not have the polish that somebody who's worked in mainstream comics for a number of years has. But even those people who work in mainstream comics, they had to start somewhere. I mean, and that's why a lot of times you see a lot of books that are, they're launched on Kickstarter, and they may get a couple of volumes or a couple of issues out, and then, the creative team maybe gets picked up to do some mainstream work for a Dark Horse or Image, or maybe they take their Kickstarter book to Image, or they move to Marvel or DC and get a chance to work on a book there. So it sounds like when you say competency, I still feel like we haven't defined what competency is. Is competency just experience? Is it draftsmanship? Or in the case of a writer, is it the ability to construct a entertaining plot not plot, but is it the ability to construct an entertaining story that is interesting and makes sense? If those are the things, I think that they are important to comics. They're important to superhero comics. But I also think that there's something that there's very few people who just come out fully formed and have all those skills. You kind of have to start making work, accept that it's going to be flawed, try to learn from those mistakes that you make and make the next thing. I mean, I put myself in that category. I don't consider myself a master storyteller. I certainly don't consider myself a master draftsman. And I mean, even these studies I'm doing right here, these studies are me looking at my figure drawing work looking at things I do wrong and trying to get better at them. So the idea of, producing work while lacking a certain level of skill and competency, it would be hypocritical of me to judge people for making work when they don't necessarily have all of the skills that, somebody who's well established in mainstream comics, because I don't have all of those skills. And I do feel that the way to get them is to make comics. So, there's no way to, if you just waited until you had all of the skills you needed before you started making comics, you would never make comics, because it takes so long to build these skills. And the act of doing it really changes. Honestly, I remember when I was in high school, and I was lucky enough to be part of a comic book, an indie comic book studio. And one of the things that the art director of the studio told me was, when I saw my work reduced in print, it would change the way that I draw. And he was very right about that, because just the idea of drawing at 11 by 17 and then having your book inked and then reduced down to, 10 by 7, 10 by 6 and change. I forget the exact dimensions. I should know them by heart, but I don't. But seeing your work inked and reduced for print, it makes you realize what details are reading on your page versus what are the details that you really don't need to put in there. And I think that seeing those things, someone can tell you about it, but seeing your work in print just changes the way that you approach it. And each time you do another piece of work and it goes into print, there's little things you may look at it afterwards and say, well, that didn't turn out the way I thought it would when I was at the drawing board. All right, I'm going to come back and look at the comments in a sec. I'm now redrawing just from this little thumbnail that I did here. And really the point that I'm doing right now, this thing, is just trying to look at, you can see these large blocky shapes that I'm using to define the whole figure. It's like I'm trying to get a framework to build details on. With this, I could come into a drawing like this and then add the anatomy. I can come in here if I want to work out his pecs. I can adjust the shape so it feels like it's wrapping around the rib cage. Put a little hard line for the deltoid so it can slip underneath the deltoid. I can put a bicep in there. This is one of those where I feel like you'd be able to see it a lot better if I zoom in. But unfortunately, with this camera, it doesn't let me zoom the way I'd like. But being able to come in and with a darker tone, define the muscles of whether it's the arm, the torso. I know I just said I was going to go look at the comments, but this idea right here interests me real quick, and I just want to explore it. In fact, that would be a good exercise for both me and for you guys, is to draw a figure and do half of it with the anatomy and then half of it not, to kind of have the comparison. Let me see if I can find a good pose, and maybe I'll do that as an exercise here next. I will say that this muscle on the inside I made way too big. That's way too big. All right. Back to the comment. Okay, let's see here. Oh, Herman's in the chat. Sorry, I got caught up with the drawing. Good to see you, Herman. Thanks for joining us. By the way, I know Herman, you had asked about when we're gonna do the drawing together. Next week, we're gonna try and do a magma group, like a drawing jam. Like it's just one of those things where I'll just bring up the screen and everyone can log in and hang out and draw. And I'm gonna send the invite for the link out through my newsletter. So the people that are already Patreon subscribers, they'll get the link through Patreon or the Patreon Discord. For anyone who is interested in doing it, I'll put a post. In fact, this is what I'm gonna do. Is I'm not gonna share the link to join the magma. What I'll do is I'll put a post on there. If anyone wants an invite, I'll invite them, because I don't want it to be like 50 people in there while we're drawing. It'll probably just be like maybe 3, 4, 5 at most. I don't think a lot of people necessarily are going to want to. But for next Sunday, for next Sunday's live stream, if you're on the newsletter already, then you can message me directly through Substack, and I'll send you an invite. For anyone else that's interested who isn't a Patreon subscriber, but if they're like a regular, because that's the other thing, is I kind of want to keep it stick it to regulars, people that I know and that have shown up at the live stream regularly, as opposed to just inviting everyone on the internet to come and draw on my live stream, because that just might get messy. All right, so back to the conversation about collaborators and green creators. So James says, yeah, I would say I see them at conventions and polish. He says, I would say it has to do with experience in writing, but I see what you mean about developing skills and having the necessary skills to be successful. But I don't know if that's objective. What would you say about someone who has the passion about art but has visual problems? Should they try to overcome them? I would say yes. But I would also say that they should try to overcome them. But I think it's actually probably a good idea to use the act of creation, the act of making something, as a tool for trying to overcome those difficulties. For instance, I look at every single comic book page that I draw as an opportunity to attempt to improve my work. So, yeah, let me move this way. I'm actually going to draw on this side. Because I don't want you to think that people shouldn't try to get better. I mean, I'm trying to get better. Literally what I'm doing here is you watching me try to get better as an artist. And I think that anyone can improve. If let's say that you're incredibly passionate, but you have almost zero artistic skill or ability, I think that that's okay. It doesn't mean that you should not try to make comics or should not try to make art. And the reason why I say this is because, if you go back to the 1800s, most people, well, this is Victorian era, so let's not say most people, but people that were educated, a lot of them had a variety of skills. People played the violin or the piano. They would paint or draw. And they would just do this as a matter of, part of society was having some sort of artistic skill, having some sort of training and doing something, basically it's like everybody had to have a creative hobby of some sort that they did. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they were good enough to be a concert pianist or concert violinist. And it doesn't mean that their paintings would be good enough to hang in a gallery. It was simply that people would all kind of have, well, I do portraits or I paint seascapes. That's what I do on the weekend. And I think that it is completely reasonable for someone to say, yeah, I didn't go to art school. My sense of proportion is wonky, but I like making art. And so I draw comics. And as they make the comics, to use the making to continue to try and improve their craft. Because one of two things will happen. One of three things will happen. Number one, you'll get frustrated that you're not getting better and you'll give up. I'm saying that first because I hope that isn't what people do, so we can just get it off the table. Two, you'll do it, not doing it well, but you'll learn and you'll get better. And over time, over weeks, over months, over years, you may develop the skills that you feel that you lack. And you develop them through hard work, not through any talent. Or number three, you will make work. It may not be technically good, but you get emotional gratification from making the work. And you might even find people respond to the work regardless of the lack of technical skill. For instance, I think most people would agree that Gary Larson's The Far Side is a very, very funny comic strip. I think most people would also agree that Gary Larson is not a great draftsman. Him being a great draftsman is not the point. The point is that he's making something that makes people laugh and that they enjoy. Now, does that carry over to comic books, where particularly superhero comic books, but just comics in general versus comic strips, where draftsmanship has a higher premium? I don't know if that carries over. There are comic artists that I think are very great visual storytellers and whose work I like, and they aren't necessarily the best draftsmen. I'm not going to name names because I don't want it to sound like I'm trying to insult them. But the point being is that comics, yes, draftsmanship, it has a higher premium on it. It is considered more important. That still does not mean that you can't make comics, even if you're not a great draftsman. And I would also like to put out the theory that even if you lack talent, you may never, no matter how much you draw in a million years, you may never become the next Neil Adams just by doing the work. But even somebody who isn't, inherently a great artist, they will still get better over time. Actually, you know what? I will name names because I don't think they would give a shit about this. And I think that they would also, they would probably recognize it. If you've ever looked at the webcomic Penny Arcade, if you look at the early years, it very much looks like a couple of teenagers drawing, weird, wonky webcomics that are about video games. If you look at the art now of, I can't remember whether it's Jer. I don't remember the guys' real names because they used fake pseudonyms for a large part of the comic strip. So I can't remember whether Jerry's the writer or the artist. But, and these are the guys who now have a huge gaming convention like a couple of times a year. They have that gaming convention PAX. So I don't know how familiar you are with Penny Arcade, but it's a hugely popular, hugely influential webcomic on video games. The work after like the first couple of years became competent. And then after that, it became fantastic. Like if you look at the work now and you go on there, it's like, it is very cartoony. It is very Bigfoot, as Neil Adams would put it. It is, the proportions are cartoony, but the draftsmanship of the comic is very, very good. And they went through a period, I don't know, because I haven't been reading it regularly, but they went through a period where they were doing short stories that were like, instead of doing stuff just about the comic video game industry, they started doing like horror stories, sci-fi stories. They had a crime noir story called Automata, which was kind of like a Raymond Chandler meets iRobot type story. Books like that, and they created a thing with the, I can't remember the name of it, but it was like a scout troop that fought supernatural monsters. Those are all things, those are all stories they did like in the era when they really were like, we can tell whatever we want to tell now. Let's flex our muscles and try doing some stories and some ideas that we couldn't do when we first started. Like the writing and the art quality has grown. So what I would say to somebody who does not have technical skill is start making the thing that you want with the skills that you have. Try to write stories that try to write a story that has, every issue should have something that you're very comfortable with drawing, and not just comfortable with. Every story should have something that you enjoy drawing, and then something that challenges you. Because the things that you enjoy will keep you going when the going gets tough. But I also think that anytime you make any piece of artwork, it's a chance to learn and to grow. So yeah, I don't think that lacking competency should stop you from making some. Now, lacking competency may stop you from selling work, or it may stop you from building an audience right away. But, people are honestly very forgiving. I mean, I know that we live in a world where it feels like the internet is like a hellscape of dumpster fire comments. But if you're earnestly just trying to be creative and share creativity with people, I have found that there's a lot more positivity out there than the world can still be the internet can still be a positive place and supportive of creators if you don't go looking for fights, is what I'm trying to say. The fights can be out there, but for the most part, if you just brush it aside and engage with people that want to support you, there's a lot more support out there. So go ahead, try, make stuff. And that's the whole point. Literally, my whole thing of fixing bad figure drawings is me looking at it and saying, yeah, I make stuff. More than half of it is not good. And just being okay with that, accepting it, and not letting it stop me from moving forward. Let's see here. All right, hang on. Let me come back up to the comments. Oh, okay. So Herman, let me get back to your comment, Herman. He said, that's cool. It will be around Sunday, your normal time, around 2 p.m. He said, if I can put that on my calendar, or do you have a different time? Excuse me, burping, coffee. Yeah, it'll be the normal time. So it's usually I do it 11 Pacific Standard Time. But yeah, that'll be the time that I'll do it. And also, yes, he said, word, you said you're going to drop the info on your Patreon page. Yeah, so for the Patreon, I'm just going to straight put the invite to Magma so anybody that's on Patreon can hop in there. For anybody who's not on the Patreon, it's not like people who, you don't have to pay to be a part of it. If you're on my newsletter, just message me on Substack, because the newsletter's on Substack now. So, and for anyone who wants to get in on it and isn't currently on my newsletter, just join the newsletter. The link is in the description for this video. And this is mainly just so that it's not an opening the floodgates and letting everyone on the internet in there. That's why I want the Patreon people, anyone who wants can join. And for anybody who isn't, I just want them to message me and then I'll send them the invite. So yeah, definitely the info will be on both. Let's see here. All right. And for anyone who missed what we were talking about, I'm going to bring up a Magma page next week, and we're just going to do a drawing jam. I'm thinking maybe we can make it themed or something, theme it like X-Men or Fantastic Four or something, since those movies are coming out. Well, not the X-Men movies, but the X-Men are always fun to draw. If I had to pick a team that I enjoy drawing more than anyone else, it's the X-Men. But Fantastic Four is coming out. That's neither here nor there. We're gonna have a drawing jam, so that's what we're talking about here. Back to James' comment. Said, okay, do you have to improve with a goal in mind, or should that come later? That is a matter of preference. Let's see here. Let me flip this here, and I need to flip this page. I've got a little bit more room to draw. And I do have not a long, rambly answer, but slightly more to say on that drawing with goal in mind. Let me just get this set up. So I very much like to have goals for things that I want to improve in. For instance, proportion. That is one of the things that I struggle with the most in drawing. Anatomy. Volume meaning just making things feel three-dimensional as opposed to flat. That's what I mean by volume. Value, light and dark. Color I don't work on very much. It is a huge one. I actually made a post on Patreon talking about how I asked ChatGPT to give me a list of artists to study specifically for improving color, because it's one of my weak points. But let me see. I'm trying to think of other things. Gesture. What else? And I realize as I draw this is just a tiny bit too far away. I really wish that when I was using this camera that it would have a zoom. Because it would be nice to be able to zoom in. Yeah, I don't even think that made much of a difference in terms of making you able to see this list clearer. But anyway, I'm trying to think. These are all what I consider the fundamentals of drawing. And usually, perspective also, that's another one. I'm going to put environment here, because on my study list it's landscapes, but the idea of drawing just the figure, if you get really good at drawing figures, and then when you have to draw a background, you could say backgrounds, but that's the whole point. A background feels like you're doing a theatrical play, or just a backdrop behind you. Whereas I want to try and figure out how to draw environments that feel like the characters are walking around, existing, living inside of. So these are all things that I think of as fundamentals of picture making. And I mean, well, at the end, composition, because composition is basically how you use all of these things to tell a story. So I think of these as the fundamentals of visual picture making. They can apply to animation, filmmaking, drawing, painting, comics, what have you. Now, when you ask the question, studying with a goal, one, I think it's hard to try and study all of these. I think it's impossible to try and improve at all of these things at once. I feel like you need to kind of you need to pick one item on this list. And usually I think the stuff like proportion, I should put gesture up here at the top. Gesture, proportion, and volume, I feel, are kind of the top three if I really had to say anything. In fact, I would say gesture is number one in terms of importance. Proportion would be number two. Volume would be number three, and anatomy would be number four. These are, I feel like, are the most important things that you probably need in terms of working on comics. Now, when you say having a goal, for me, it's less about having a goal than it is me paying attention to working on them. It helps to have a sense of who you're measuring yourself against. So if Neal Adams is the bar that you want to measure against, then it's worth finding like Neal Adams comic pages that have, well, I don't think that it's great to study anatomy from comic book artists because comic book artists by nature have to distort anatomy, but gesture is great. So let's say that you want to study, that reminds me, speaking of gesture, silhouette is another good one. It kind of goes with composition. Believe it or not, a strong silhouette can go a long way towards selling a drawing where the anatomy and the proportion might be really, really wonky. But if you have a strong silhouette with a strong gesture, you can totally sell a lot of visual storytelling. So I would say in terms of having a goal, I would say one, create a list of influences. Then I would say two, identify the qualities that make up this skill. You know, like if you see a drawing and you're like, oh, this has a cool gesture to it. If you're studying gesture and you really like the gestures of a particular artist, like let's say a comic book artist who is very cartoony, Scotty Young. That's a good example. I'm on his newsletter, on his mailing list. I look at a lot of his work. You know, he is somebody who is cartoony and dynamic and fun. His gestures are great. It's worth looking at his drawings and literally trying to maybe, when I think of master studies, I don't think of them as trying to duplicate a person's drawing directly. It's more about kind of deconstructing and analyzing what are the qualities that make it feel like it accomplishes the goals. So then three is master studies dissect qualities. So when you ask about goals, it's not necessarily a list to check off of I need to draw this way by this time. It's more about creating a framework to analyze someone else's work, look at it, figure out what you want from that work in your work, and then practice copying those skills. So, you know, that's how I would approach it in terms of, you know, all of these. But again, this whole list up here of different qualities that make up drawing fundamentals, you got to pick one at a time. Your head will explode and melt if you're trying to practice all of these things at one time. And the list of artists that you would pick to study gesture may be completely different from the list of artists that you would study for proportion. And when I say proportion, that doesn't necessarily mean a Neil Adams classical superhero proportion. You might decide, I want to study, cartoony proportions, and you might study Scotty Young and a couple of other artists that are maybe cartoony. You have to decide you want to study, big beefy characters proportion. You might look at John Buscema, and you might also look at John Romita Jr. Compare those two guys because they both draw big, powerful figures, but they draw them in different ways and different approaches. For anatomy, I'm trying to think who are like the really great anatomists. I really like Mark Schultz from Xenozoic Tales, Cadillac and Dinosaurs. He probably doesn't think of himself as an anatomist because he's somebody who's very much just doing classical, like just illustration, but his anatomy is really on point. And to be honest, I would have to sit and really think hard about who are the artists that I really like for anatomy and comics, because comics is such a medium of expressionistic and impressionistic art. Comic books are so stylized that I really don't think it's a great place to study anatomy. I really feel that anatomy is one where you're better studying from guys like George Bridgman and Andrew Loomis. I forget Vanderpool's first name, but Vanderpool. I've got a book called Anatomy for the Artist, Atlas of Anatomy for the Artist by Scott Peck. Walt Reed, The Figure. I've been doing, like on my Patreon, I've been doing a long running analysis of that book. For anatomy, I would look at figure drawing educators. That's the one specifically where I'm like, I would go away from comics on this list for anatomy. That's when we really need that. And I would say probably the same for volume, although you can probably find a lot of comic artists that do very cool volumes and make things feel structural as well. Let's see here. Let's get back to the comments. In fact, there we go. I'm stretching my body a bit too much to get over to the mic. Let's see here. James says, I feel it sometimes when I was in school, there was pressure to be a great draftsman. Then again, my teachers knew I could do better, so I can't fault them for that. Well, you know what? Well, there is pressure in school to be a great draftsman. The same way that, like, being on a sports team, there's a great pressure to be a great athlete. But here's something that I studied for many, many years with Carl Ganas. He's a long time. He started off as a storyboard. Well, he did storyboard art, billboard painting. He's worked in animation for years. He continues to teach at all of the major studios, DreamWorks, Disney. And he continues to teach in his own school online. When I first started taking classes with him, he told us very clearly, he said that he teaches craft. He does not teach art. And he pointed at everyone in the class. He said, art comes from you. Art is a personal expression. So the technical skill, the reason why I bring this up, James, is because about the pressure to be a great draftsmanship. Wanting to improve your skills is not the same as wanting to make great art. If you look at punk bands, you look at the Sex Pistols, you look at the Bad Brains, you look at the Dead Kennedys, they weren't really about technical skill. Now, what's interesting is you go to someplace like Fugazi. They were a punk band. Well, actually, if you look at Minor Threat is punk. Fugazi is punk, but they're seasoned musicians. They started bringing more technical skill into it. But the point is that it doesn't need to be an either or option. You can make work that is expressive and is purely expressive regardless of the technical skill you have. You can try to improve your work and continue to be a draftsman. Continue to become a better draftsman. You can do the things separately and have your own personal studies and not have it affect the art that you're trying to make. You can do them together. And like, this is the way I look at it. If I'm going to be making art anyway, why not use it as an opportunity to continue to grow? Like, I've got my books right here for kind of the sign off at the end. On every single page of this book is something that I drew that I'm proud of. And on every single page of the book, there's a place where I tried to do something that I suck at and I failed. Every single page. Because if I'm going to be spending weeks and months and years trying to make a graphic novel, it's a perfect time to try to get better. I personally, you can say, hide your mistakes and keep your personal studies and not share with anybody. But I mean, life is too short. There's too much shit to do. So it sounds like you're struggling with that idea of making art and feeling like you need to be at a certain place, or, worrying about the permission that people, I mean, you just got to do what you want to do, because it sounds like you want to be a better artist, but you also want to tell great stories, and you can do both. And you can accept the fact that you kind of have to accept that you're not going to do it great early on. Like, I mean, in the end, yeah, I drew a lot of stuff before I made these books, but I've only published 3 graphic novels on my own. I've done a bunch of stories for the studio I was in high school. I've done a bunch of one-shot and random comics like during college in my 20s. But in the end, I've published 3 graphic novels. That's a drop in the bucket compared to a professional comic book artist career. I'm still so far away from putting, like, when I've got like maybe 10 books that I've done, 20 books that I've done, then I'll say, oh, well, I've really learned a lot now. And I need to get going on that because I'm not getting any younger. But I encourage you to free yourself up from this stuff. I mean, it's good in terms of like conversation about art and talking about the process and how we explore art, where we want to, how we're trying to grow creatively. But I never want that to stand in anyone's way of just trying to make stuff, because again, there's no telling what you're going to make that's going to spark joy in other people and that they're going to be drawn to, even if it doesn't necessarily have all the craft that you want. Let's see here. Yeah, so James said yes, Penny Arcade, which I mentioned a while back. So you're familiar with them. Let's see here. And Herman says we'll have to check out Penny Arcade. Yes, that's also, yeah, worth taking your time, worth checking out. James says perspective class was difficult for me. I did get some help though. Yeah, perspective is a tough one. I will say that at the encouragement of Carl Ganas, I've mentioned John Messer. So John Messer taught at the Animation Guild as well, and Carl was the one. If my memory of the story is correct, Carl was the one who asked and encouraged and really wanted John to teach at the Animation Guild. And I think part of it was that Carl just did not want to spend his time teaching perspective, because he really was interested in teaching story and figurative work. But my whole thing in taking John's class was that I wasn't even necessarily that interested in perspective per se, but the way that I'm going in here and I'm blocking in this figure. Let's say that I'm blocking in, I'm going to kind of do a drawing off to the side here. Let's just say that I'm blocking in a seated pelvis. And then above the pelvis, you've got the rib cage. They're turning, let's say that they're turning slightly towards you. So these blocks, very simple, but if you have a poor sense of perspective, just drawing simple blocks and rotating them in space is going to be challenging. So for me, that was my theory was all of the wonky figure drawing that I was doing. What if the whole problem was just I'm not good at drawing blocks? And that was my reason for wanting to take perspective class. Now, I learned a whole lot more about drawing environments, drawing the figure. And I mean, that's why I have environments on the list here. It really was valuable and it has taught me a lot. I mean, and perspective can be really daunting. I think because a lot of times it comes as an afterthought and it's this abstract thing that feels very math-like, as opposed to making perspective about drawing things that you're interested in. If you like drawing cars, if you like drawing animals, if you like drawing like magical kingdoms or castles, if you can find a way to link perspective to something that you enjoy, I find that being a lot easier. But yeah, perspective can be daunting because it just feels like adding math to art. And it's like, why would you do that? But, again, John Messer is a really great instructor. So he's, that's one of the things he excels at is making perspective fun. Let's see here. We're at about an hour. So I think we are at that stage where I am going to sit this drawing aside and I'm just going to focus on these last comments here, and we'll just talk for a little bit, wrap up the comments, and then we'll call it a day on the live stream. And let's see here. Let's see here. Herman says the internet taking the good with the bad. Yeah. Well, that's true. But I find that the algorithm does work. If you just stop clicking on things that you don't like and hit the like button on things that you do, I've found that on most social media platforms, it stops showing me people fighting and being combative and being nasty. It'll just deliver me things that make me happy. I mean, my feed these days is cool art and cat videos. That's what I see on the internet now. And I'm happy with that. So I think it's because it's human nature to get drawn to things that anger us or terrify us and then wanting to react to it. And instead of reacting to it, I choose to say, that's not what I'm interested in. And the internet has responded to me. It doesn't deliver me shit I don't want to see. Yeah, Herman says it's 2 p.m. his time. And also for the drawing jam for Fantastic Four, X-Men doesn't matter. Well, who knows? We'll play it by our ear. But yeah, I'll definitely send the information out on the newsletter on Substack and I'll put the invite out on Substack and I'll send the information out on Discord and Patreon. And Timon, good to see you. Says I'm going to become a member again next pay period. My car got lost, but definitely need to draw figures to study the figure and not draw a figure for the sake of it. I'll be happy to have you back. Sorry, your card got lost. But yeah, well, I'll tell you what, regardless of whenever you become a member, next week, I'm going to do this thing we were talking about. It's called Magma. And basically it's like instead of a drawing program that's online, instead of like Krita, instead of a web-based browser-based, it's a browser-based drawing program, but it's a browser-based drawing program in which people can draw as a group. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Anyway, we're going to do a drawing jam next week, and you don't have to be on Patreon to join it. I'm going to ask people that are on the newsletter if they want to join and then send out individual invites that way. So whether you're on Patreon or not, you can join that next week if you want. Let me see. Now, this is interesting. You said, I definitely need to draw figures to study the figure and not draw for the sake of it. I think that may come back to this list that I have on the screen, because that was me kind of breaking down all of the things that I want to continue. Like for me, it's not a matter of, oh, I need to check off a box in terms of knowing these things. These are things that I feel are the fundamentals of picture making, and I'm always working on improving them. Like even if I've been doing gesture drawing all my life. I mean, that's what you do when you're drawing with a crayon as a kid, and I still work on it. So I definitely feel like when you say drawing to study the figure, it's worth picking. What I like to do is not necessarily for a particular drawing, but I'd say for a particular session. If I say I'm going to sit down for an hour, I like to pick one of the things off of that list and say, for this session, I'm going to work on proportion. That's really what I'm going to focus on. What that means is if the gestures are wonky, if the perspective is wonky, if the anatomy is weird, I'm not going to sweat it. My point is to really focus on making sure the proportion is right for every particular one I do. Or if it's gesture, making sure that the gesture is one of those ones where in pursuing gesture, a lot of other stuff can go really wonky. It's gesture is the glue that can hold everything together, but getting a good gesture down sometimes means that everything goes weird. So it's hard to get all of these elements working in concert. But that's why you practice. You focus on one aspect and you practice it. And then you focus on another aspect and practice it on a different day. And then you focus on another one a different day. And what you find is as you practice these and you come back, the next time you come back and you practice gesture, your proportion isn't going to be as wonky because you also spent some time working on proportion. Next time you work on proportion, you're going to find that your anatomy is going to be a little bit better because you spent some time practicing anatomy. And then over time, you always keep going through that cycle of picking one aspect to focus on because it's impossible to actively try to train on all of them at the same time. But each time that you do it, you'll get a little bit better at the other ones. If that makes sense. If that makes sense, is that you bring that practice in as you try to do the other things. So let's see here. I see Dylan is in the chat. Hi, Dylan. Good to see you. We're just about wrapping up here. I'm just getting through the last of the comments, but thanks for joining us. Let's see here. Herman says, your whole list of things to get better equals just drawing for me. He said, but those are great. I need help in all. Well, again, like I said, this is not my list to dictate to you guys. This is my list of these are all the things I am constantly trying to improve and get better at. You see, it just feels weird when I've got this light shining over my shoulder there. So I figure I could turn that light off. There's enough light in this room that the list is still up there. It looks fine. Let's see here. Herman says, hey, have Scotty Young drawn for Marvel Comics? I wouldn't think they would want their characters depicted in a style like that as far as selling books. So excuse my ignorance. Hell yes, Scotty Young is like one of their top cover artists. Scotty Young is in demand for his cute interpretations of like Deadpool, X characters, Avengers. Like he is one of the top selling like cover artists. Now he doesn't do as much interiors for Marvel or DC anymore. Mostly, I think when he draws interiors, it's his Image Comics, his self-published work. But I mean, for a long time, he did a long-running. Was he just writing The Wizard of Oz? No, he was drawing The Wizard of Oz, and I think someone else was writing it. But he did a long-running adaptation that was published by Marvel of the Wizard of Oz books. Before that, he's done, I'm trying to think of things that he did as a long running series where he was drawing, because he's done stuff like, I know he wrote a Rocket Raccoon series that was drawn by Jake Parker. I think when he has drawn comics, it tended to be limited series and 4-issue runs. because I think there's a large gap because he's been, Scotty Young's been in the industry for years. He's a well-established professional. I remember seeing his stuff when he first started, when he was doing Human Torch and The Thing. And I remember the very first stuff of his I saw, which I've never been able to get a copy of, which is it was a manga influenced Spider-Man comic, and I think it was called The Curse of the Spider Clan. And so it was a very, very cartoony manga influenced Spider-Man comic. Very fun, very cool. Um, so I remember the stuff when he first came into the industry, and then I remember seeing him doing a lot of cover comic, cover a lot of variant covers, and doing a lot of like mini series, like 4-issue mini series. And then I remember his long run on Wizard of Oz, which I think took up like 5 or 8 years, maybe almost a decade or something. Um, and then I remember him going off and starting I Hate Fairyland and doing a lot more of his own self-published work. So there's lots of other stuff within that he's done that I'm not aware of, but definitely he has worked for Marvel. And I don't know if he's done interiors for DC, but I mean, Scotty Young is a person who he made his own path. Yes, his style is not a mainstream superhero style in terms of whether for Marvel or for DC, but that goes back to the whole idea of being so good that they can't deny you. And that's also the other reason why I know that I'm going to encourage you guys to, keep studying and the same way that I'm studying, but I also encourage you to just make the stuff you want to make, because Scotty Young went out and made the stuff that he wanted to make, and it didn't look like mainstream superhero comics, but it was damn good, and he found work. So that's not saying that you shouldn't do the things that you want to do, just because you don't draw like Neil Adams, just because you don't draw like Brian Stelfreeze. Love me some Brian Stelfreeze. Nobody draws like Brian Stelfreeze. um, Other guys. I'm trying to think of who else were some comic artists that because I'm kind of all over the map. I like everything. I like a lot of different styles. Like who's it that I'm thinking of right now? Raphael Albuquerque. He's another one. Just because you don't necessarily draw. Okay, Jorge Jimenez. All the work he's been doing on Batman with Chip Zdarsky. He kills it. Dan Mora with all of the world's finest stuff that he's doing over at DC. Amazing artist Pepe Larraz and the House of X, Powers of X stuff that he did with Jonathan Hickman. They're all very different artists. They're all artists whose work I love. And my work does not look like theirs. And no matter how much I try, my work is never going to look like theirs. That does not mean that I need to just keep banging my head against the wall and trying to get as close to theirs as I can. It just means I do two things. I keep trying to get better, and I try to do the best I can with the tools I have at the time. That's all you can do. That's it. That's all you can do. And what that means, becoming comfortable with the fact that you're never going to quite get, it means becoming comfortable of ongoing dissatisfaction only in the sense that in your desire to just improve at these skills, how these skills look, improving your sense of volume is going to look different for you than it's going to look for Pepe Larraz. It's going to look different for you than it would have looked for, let's say, like Jeromo Pena. I'm pulling names out of the hat of just artists I like, but improving your gesture is going to look different for you than it's going to look for Jorge Jimenez. You just got to do it and know that your stuff there's always going to be a certain degree you're like, didn't hit the mark. It's okay. It's like, imagine if, you're just going to the gym and you're lifting weights, there's always going to be a certain amount of weight you're going to try and bench, and you're just not going to be able to hit it. And you're like, well, I lift what I can lift today. And you just keep trying to grow. Let's see here. All right, back to the comments. So Herman says, I've seen the Max and even Spawn. They still have some realistic to a certain degree of proportion. Ah, I don't know. I mean, I will tell you when I look at the max, I got to push back on some realistic proportion. I mean, the max is cartoonier than Bill Watterson to me. I would say that when you look at Bigfoot drawing or just the idea of pushing cartoony style in the art, I would put the max up there as at least as cartoony as Scotty Young, if not more. Sam Keith, I love me some Sam Keith, but I would say that the Max is probably one of the most cartoony artists out there. Now, to go to back to Spawn, it's funny because I was just recently reading the book Haunt that Robert Kirkman co-created with Todd McFarlane, and Todd was inking the first volume. He was inking it over Ryan Ottley, and it was really interesting because it was an interesting merge of styles. Because I want to say that Greg Capullo did the layouts, Ryan Ottley did the pencils, and then Tom McFarlane inked it, and it was a good book, but it was weird because I could see all of the artists in the book. And that's only because I'm familiar with all of them. I'm not saying that it stood out. It's just one of those things where I've read enough of each of those people's work that I could see all of them in it, but none of it looked like theirs. So it was a very interesting book. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say that Spawn is definitely more realistic than the Max. But I mean, when I think of realism, I'm thinking of artists who their proportions are not photographically real, but the proportions very much feel like human proportion. Like they look like what would happen if you would have real humans doing these things. And I'm not necessarily talking about Alex Ross level of realism, but if you're familiar with Lee Weeks, he's somebody who I think of as having very naturalistic proportions, very realistic proportions. And like the opposite of cartoony. And that is with quotes, because again, the whole thing that Neil Adams talked about was that in order to really sell superheroes, you need to be able to exaggerate and make those things work. I'm trying to think of other people besides Lee Weeks that I think of as just very great illustrators. They're not doing too much cartooning in their work. Brian Stelfreeze is another one who I think of as he's capable of cartooning and pushing his work, and he does that in superhero work. But he's another one that I would say, like Lee Weeks, Brian Stelfreeze, Lee Weeks. I'm trying to think of who else off the top of my head. It gets hard when there's so many comic creators in the world that are great. I'm actually looking over at my bookshelf now, trying to see if there's anybody who pops into my head. Well, hell, Adi Granoff. It's another one. He's another comic creator who I'd think of as, I mean, he has a very rendered, almost like video game style or concept art style. He's another one who I'd say is very much in that ballpoint. And hey, sorry it took us long to get to the comment. Gary's in the chat. He says, "Happy Sunday, dude. Happy Sunday to you. Hope you're doing well." Oh, yeah. James says, "Right. I enjoy experimenting and being expressionistic." Exactly. Go with it. You can be expressionistic and experiment, and you can do all those things while continuing to want to improve on any aspects of drawing fundamentals. They don't have to be, you don't have to do them at the same time. But it doesn't have to be a one or the other. You've got options. It's here. Herman says, "Bro, you make a lot of sense." Thank you. It says, "It's just scary seeing what I do and know that sucks through the eyes of peers. People can see people can fake the funk when selling to a non-artist, but your art represents you." Well, I think that's faking the funk is coming in and trying to act like you're the shit when you're not. I mean, I don't think I've ever. it's a fine line when for instance, when I'm at comic conventions and I'm selling my artwork to people, what I am doing is I'm telling them about the characters. I tell them about what interested me in wanting to make this story. I tell them why I think the characters and the world are cool and why it's interesting. I don't tell them this is the best drawn indie comic you're going to find here, because that's faking the funk. I've walked the floor. I've seen what other people can do. So I'm not going to try and pitch people on me being the best artist. I'm just trying to tell them it's a cool story. It's something that I'm passionate about. I just try to tell people why I'm excited about it. And I think that if you, the whole framework of faking the funk or trying to impress fellow creatives, that's the whole problem. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. You can't look at it like I'm trying to impress someone, or I don't want this person to call me out for not being as good as I want to. Because, I mean, generally speaking, when I see other creators, what I look for is what excites them. I try not to look at, I'm not interested in their flaws. Like if they ask me for critique, if they ask me what do they think I can do better, I'll point out things. I'm like, I see what you're trying to do. Are you influenced by this artist? Because if you are, maybe look at this, maybe practice these things. I'm not looking at them like, who is this person and why are they trying to make comics? I want everybody to make stuff, and I just want people to be happy, enjoying making them. And to be honest, I think if you meet people that are actively looking to chew people up and spit them out, those are toxic people. Just walk away from them. Yeah, I'll tell you, I've told this story before, but decades ago, I brought my work to San Diego, and I was going around. I was showing my portfolio to people and getting critiques. And one of the people who was there was Ryan Benjamin, and just seeing another, seeing a black artist who's a professional in the industry, and having him being able to take time to look at give me feedback meant a lot to me. Now, I will tell you, the work I was doing back then was trash. It was dumpster fire trash. But it was, you could also see that I was clearly influenced by Bill Sienkiewicz, and he saw that in the work, and he said, I can see what you're doing here. He said, that's not what I do. I do mainstream action superhero comics. He said, but I see what you're trying to do here. He said, what would help you would be spend more time figure drawing, working from life. There were a couple other things, but the main thing I took away was, he saw that I didn't have the draftsmanship to hold together the expressive work that I was doing. He didn't tear me down. He just looked at what I was doing and said, I see where you're trying to go. Let me try and give you some tips to help you go and continue going farther in that direction. And I think I learned a lot from receiving that critique from him, because I don't think it behooves anybody to just go and shit on people. I don't know who that benefits. It doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit the person I'm talking to. It doesn't make the world a better place. But anyway, I mean, I hope that the idea of faking the funk, I hope that addresses that, just in the sense that most people out there aren't rooting for you to fail. Most people out there are rooting for you to succeed. So it's okay to put stuff out there and stub your toe. I'm sure that you're going to run into assholes out there, but I think that overall there's more people that are rooting for you and encouraging you than people that are out there just being dicks. So, in fact, you know what? I can't remember where I saw it, but I think I may have reposted this. I saw a comment. They said that imposter syndrome, that they said that the definition, somebody else said that they found a definition of imposter syndrome that they really identified with, and I completely agreed, which was, it's the fear that others will judge you as harshly as you judge yourself. And that cut to the bone for me, because for as much as I'm really encouraging to all you guys, I'm very, very harsh on myself. And I think that part of the reason why I try to be is not tried, but the reason why a lot of my approach towards everyone is just encouraging them to explore and just wherever you're at, keep growing, is because those are the words that I need to hear. I don't want to let my crushing perfectionism stop me from doing anything. So I'm telling you the same things that I myself need to hear. I just need to hear it's okay. I know it's not perfect. It's not right. It may not even be good. Just keep going, keep working. If this one's bad, maybe the next drawing will be better. If this issue's bad, maybe the next issue will be better. If this comic book series sucks, maybe you'll do better with the next comic book series. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So, all right, let me see if I can get to the end here because I've been rambling and rambling and rambling. James says, I know you talked before about doing an assignment so you can get a grade. Sure, that matters. But are you a pleasant person? Do you have a grade A personality that would make people want to work with you? No, I don't. If I'm going to be completely honest, part of the reason why I prefer to work on my own stuff where I'm writing and drawing and inking and doing it myself is because I don't think I'm a great collaborator. I am a control freak. And I kind of have two modes. I either have robot hands mode where I'm like, you tell me what I want, tell me what you want, and I will try to get as close to it as possible. Or leave me alone and let me do it exactly the way I want to do. When I'm working for myself, I can exercise the leave me alone, let me do exactly what I want to do side. When I am working for clients, I am in robot mode where I'm just like, my whole thing is I'm asking questions to try and get a good sense of what the client wants and how to get what they want. For me, the hardest part is when a client wants me to be more collaborative, wants me to engage. And because usually when they ask for feedback or they ask for input, I've already given them what I thought was the best idea. And I'm like, well, I already told you what I think you should do. So if you don't like that, I'm not butthurt about it. Just tell me what you want. But the thing when they don't want what I gave them, but they don't know what they want yet either, that's where I have to be patient, take a deep breath and say, all right. I try to kind of like put myself in their place and say, all right, let's explore some options and try to find a way let's try to figure out what it is that we as a group want and then move forward in that direction. But that's something that is counterintuitive to my nature. And I do it because I'm getting paid to do it. I'm not doing it because it's fun for me. And that's why for my personal artwork, I tend to work alone. No, I don't think I have a great personality for collaborating. It doesn't mean that I would never collaborate with someone because I think that you learn a lot by collaborating with others. But I think that I would need to feel confident enough in my skills that I can create whatever it is a collaborator would ask for so that it becomes less about my drawing skills and more about us then just playing with ideas and batting them about back and forth. And right now, I'm still at a stage where I struggle so much with the craft that having to juggle that I did the manipulating of the idea at the same time would be frustrating for me. And when I say I struggle with the craft, what I mean is like that whole list of things about of fundamentals that I'm studying, actively working on. The reason why I take so long to draw comics and to draw, put out books and publish things is because I can make what I consider a decent comic book page. I can make something that I would say that I'm proud of, but it takes a lot of work. It's not instinctual to me yet. It doesn't flow. It's not something where I'm cranking out stuff a page a day. And I think that when you get to the point where you're really flowing as a creator, that's when it kind of frees up your headspace to just, to play with the ideas. And it's because this takes so much focus and energy for me mentally that I don't think I can. It's hard to shift to that collaborative mindset. So I don't know. I mean, and again, like the question you specifically asked, James, you'd said, do you have a grade A personality that would make people want to work with you? I'm not really worried about making anyone want to work with me. I'm not worried about getting a gig at DC or Marvel. I'm not worried about, I don't, obviously, you guys definitely get the tone from speaking with me. I don't go out of my way to be a dick. I try to be a pretty pleasant person, but I'm not worried about earning work by being someone that people want to work with. I do think that you definitely need to be able to be a pleasant person, and because I think that when you're producing, I've never worked at a mainstream comic book publisher, but the deadlines that everyone, editors, colorists, letterers, pencilers, inkers, writers, the crushing deadlines of monthly comics from everyone I've talked to is such that you do have to be able to. It's not necessarily about being a nice person, it's about being a respectful person who communicates with people. That's really what it's about. You don't necessarily have to, it's not about being quote unquote nice. You don't want to be a dick, but it's definitely like treat everyone with respect and communicate openly. That is the one thing I've heard with people constantly about that stuff. But it's hard. It's hard. You're running a marathon every single month and it never stops. And that's another reason why I'm kind of like, I'm all right doing my indie shit, so we'll see. All right. Let me get back into the comments here. Dylan says, I'm doing okay, mostly chilling with a little cleaning. Well, that's good. That's good. Let's see here. Alpha Proto says Scotty Young didn't always draw that way. He says he used to draw a lot cleaner. He didn't really hit his stride until he got his Watterson-inspired style. And he said, I think on Runaways, he drew that. And that's interesting. I did not know that Scotty Young worked on Runaways. I'll have to go look at some of that older stuff. But yeah, he says the Spider-Man Mangaverse. See, that was the thing that I first saw from Scotty Young, but I didn't know that he had done some Marvel stuff even before that. But you know what? That's a really good point. I didn't know that. But I think that actually really is interesting to look at creators and how their style evolves over time. Because even if you go back and you look at the Spider-Verse stuff or the Human Torch stuff that I remember, that stuff feels like that's a different artist from the artist that evolved into working on the Wizard of Oz. And the Wizard of Oz artist, even though you can very much see that look in a lot of the stuff when he went on to do I Hate Fairyland, you can still feel that I Hate Fairyland was like an even funkier, even more, like he was just going farther. He was just pushing it. But yeah, I think he's a great example. Somebody who has carved up his own path in mainstream comics while maintaining something that's very unique and different. Let's see here. Herman says, well, then I have a ton of weird sketches like Scotty. I need to publish then. I hear editors would come down on artists all the time, so I never thought they would appreciate my style. My problem is consistency, which I really need when trying to do animation. And I suffer from consistency as well. I've often said that I should do my model sheets, my style guides after I finish doing all of my layouts for an entire book, because it takes me a whole graphic novel series. It takes me like 4 issues to figure out how to draw a character. So it's like I should do the layouts for the entire thing, then figure out what the character's costume should look like, and then go back and ink the whole series. That would probably be the smartest way thing if I wanted it to feel consistent. Well, Well, I there's a comedian, Aisha Tyler. She did the voice of Lana on Archer. She's on Criminal Minds now. She was the black girl dating Ross on Friends. I mean, I didn't know I saw that coming. But anyway, she had a long running podcast that I really loved called Girl on Guy. And one of the recurring themes that she brought up on the show was the idea for comedians about how at a certain point you have to let go of the comedian that you want to be in order to become the comedian that you really are. And the way that the reason why I'm bringing that up is because you mentioned the thing about not mentioning Herman. You said about editors coming down on artists and how you didn't think they would appreciate your style. Well, there are some people who can choose a style. They can pick a style and mimic it. There are people who are visual mimics, and that's just part of their skill set. And to be honest, when I was younger, I was a visual mimic, and somehow I aged out of it. In the act of trying to learn how to draw better, I grew out of that, and now I can't really mimic other people's styles anymore. But at a certain point, again, this is balancing two contradictory ideas at the same time. I'm not telling you that they're not contradictory. I'm saying that you have to learn how to hold them at the same time because they are contradictory, which is to continue to grow as an artist, but at the same time, accept who you are and accept your style. And that's hard because a lot of times, many comic artists have said, I've heard people say that your style is just a collection of the mistakes you make consistently. So, which again comes back to consistency. But the idea simply of both wanting to grow, but accepting your limitations, which is just a repeat. It's a remix of what we were talking about earlier. But the idea of that, having weird sketches in your sketchbook and having a style that you don't think would fit, if anything, fighting that style and trying to push it more into a house style may be doing you more harm than good. I mean, honestly, it comes down to the fact of figuring out what works for you. I mean, I can see a world where adapting your style and saying, oh, if I change these 3 things about my art, I'll start getting work from Marvel or DC. I think most people would take that bargain and they would just change the things and do it. But if changing those things makes it harder to draw and makes you unable to meet a monthly deadline or whatever your regular deadline is, or it just saps all of the joy out of making art, then you may not have the choice. If you can choose to if you can just consciously say, I'm going to make a concerted effort to do these 3 things, and it's going to make my work appealing to comic book editors, and it's going to get me work, then do those things. But for some people, you don't necessarily have a choice. I don't think I have a choice. I think that I just draw the way I draw. Which is weird because I also feel like my style is ill-defined. So I need to keep at it and keep working. Although my buddy Carl Altstetter would say that I'm a poor man's Gil Kane. Which, I mean, that's an honor. It's an honor to be even compared to someone like that. So I'll take it. All right. Yes, Herman says that Stelfreeze is amazing. I think we can all agree on that. He says, I think it comes down to me just being hard on myself and not having the support in art or even finding a job in the art industry. Kind of life started kicking me when I finished my 2nd degree. Well, I mean, I feel like that isn't necessarily a bad thing. If I had to try and make a living as a full-time comic creator, I couldn't right now. Maybe someday. But the fact that I'm making my living in an industry, you know, doing toy design, where I'm either doing product design or packaging design, it's a creative field. It is adjacent to art, it's adjacent to comics. But I feel like if I don't know if I mean, because when I got out of college, I went into web design, and it wasn't out of love. It was because I couldn't get a job doing any artwork. The only thing I could get a job was doing like Flash animation because I had studied animation, and Flash was the big new thing, and I know how to use it. So that's really it. And then you spend enough. Once I got done doing a bunch of like animation gigs, and I was not a good animator either. And I knew how to use the software. So this is not one of those, oh, I was a wonderkin. No, no. Um, and once I got all of the animation gigs that I could get, there was still a lot of work doing just design in animation. And that's how I got into web design. My point being is that if you can put food on the table and do something that you don't want to slit your throat doing, or there's something that doesn't make you want to slit your wrists every day, and then it leaves you enough time to come home and do personal artwork, I am actually in favor of doing whatever gives you the financial stability to pursue art on your terms. Because I think that the idea of, I don't want to tell people they shouldn't shoot for working for major publishers. I've never done it. I know that it's very, very hard, but I don't want to discourage you from that dream if that's what you want. But what I will say is I took the path of, I didn't get a day job that was completely unart related. I found a day job that was art related that I actually really enjoy. But having that financial stability allowed me to make comic books for me, make the stories that I want to tell, draw them how I want to tell them. If there's places where the books fall down in terms of quality, it's on me and it's my responsibility. But I can choose to put something out there, even if it's imperfect, and get feedback from people and try to use that to make it better. And I actually feel that having that freedom is healthier than constantly being in fight or flight mode, constantly feeling like I'm keeping the wolf at my door, having to deal with possibly toxic work environments or work relationships because I want to keep working, just because I want to keep comic book work coming in. I've heard all those kind of horror stories from other creators. And I honestly feel like, you know, it's not like I don't want to do comics. I just want to do them on my terms, you know? And I'm not saying that I deserve that. Like my work is so dope that I deserve to do it on my terms. I'm just saying that I don't want to have to fight a rat race or feel like I'm selling my soul, you know? And I've been able to do that. And the price that I paid for that is I do it much slower. You know, I'm not doing it full time. I'm not putting out a book every month. I'm not putting out, hell, it's been a couple of years since I put out an issue of a new comic. Because I'm getting wrapped up in my perfectionist shit with my new comic, which I was going to work on this live stream today, except I woke up and I realized I'd forgotten to charge my tablet. It was at 0. All right. That was a long ass rant, and sorry you commented a while ago. Alpha Proto mentioned Frank Frazetta, and it's like, yes, love me some Frazetta. I've got a couple of art books that I bought. Flesk Publishing, I think, put them out, and it was the Fantastic World of Frank Frazetta. It was a very large, beautiful album of Frazetta work, and then they had a second book that I could pick up that was the sensual Frank Frazetta. It was like all of this sexy female painting, just because I'd never had a collection. Oh, I guess this was the conversation where we were talking about artists that were more realistic. You know, well, Frazetta is an interesting. He's an interesting character because I actually feel like Frazetta is more cartoony. I mean, yes, he's a painter, but his fantasy work, he's definitely has character. First off, he's a painter who did comics as well. I would definitely put. See, Frazetta is the because I was gonna say I would compare him to Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. I mentioned him earlier. Mark Schultz. I would compare Frazetta to Schultz, which is interesting because Schultz should be compared to Frazetta. Frazetta really is the one who has the template for it, but I would say that a lot of people who, you know, I'm trying to think of a proper way to describe it because it is. I would say that if anything, Frazetta to me feels more. Not he's not cartoony, but he does feel more exaggerated than Lee Weeks. In a good way. Like his paintings can be like natural proportions. But then you look at like the women that he has in there, and you look at like the Conan paintings and the rippling muscles and the way that he pushes it. Like for instance, a way to compare him is if you were to compare Frazetta and Boris Vallejo. Boris and Frazetta are both amazing fantasy artists. Boris is a little more naturalistic, just a little more realism. And let's say that if you were to move 1 or 2 degrees more towards cartoony, you get Frazetta. If you were to turn that dial hard to the left, you get Simon Beasley. You see what I'm saying? Beasley is a painter who is like Beasley is right there with Ralph Steadman. Like he's one step back from Steadman. I mean, he can dial it in and tighten it if he wants to, but it's like, why would he? You when you ask Beasley to draw, you're asking for Beasley. You want Beasley. I mean, and I think that's the interesting thing when you talk about these cartoony artists that we talk about, Sam Keith, Scotty Young, creators like that. When you have them, like that's what you want. You want them to be wild. You want them to be expressive. Ben Templesmith, that's another one. When you ask for Ben Templesmith, it's because you want Ben Templesmith. You don't want Ben Templesmith to come in and do a beautiful, light, dainty watercolor. You want like craggly, crazy looking ass creatures that are going to tear your ass up. That's what he brings. Yeah. So let's see here. Let me get back in the comments. Let's see. Herman says, like Jim Lee. I saw some Lee Weeks stuff, so I get it. It said, no, when I say Max, although the cartoons, some aspect of it looks identifiable human, but I get it. He says, Jeremy, I think I met you one time during Baltimore Comic-Con. For some reason, I remember you. I was going around looking for indie artists trying to get their experience and making their own. Now, here's the thing. I've never done Baltimore, but on the East Coast, I've did Chicago Comic-Con years ago. I want to say, because I know it was before my wife and I got married. So it would have been back in about 2015. So right around that era, there was one year where I was trying to do like a convention a month while working a day job just to try and see if I could get enough convention revenue going that I could make it, all right, get a predictable amount of money I was making from doing conventions and then say, all right, this is going to be my gig now. So I'm going to make money. And I only ended up doing 9 shows that year, and it damn near killed me doing that. But let me see. Minnesota. Maybe it was Minnesota. Because I remember that year I did Wizard World gave like a deal if you bought tables at multiple shows, and Wizard had bought Chicago. So it was Wizard World Chicago. Because I've never done C2E2, but I remember so I haven't done Baltimore, but maybe it was Minnesota because I did Wizard World Minnesota, I did Wizard World Chicago, and I think I might have done. Let me see. I'm trying to think. New Orleans is the South. It's not really the East Coast, but I think I might have done one other East Coast or Midwest show during that time. But we might have met at. I don't know if Minnesota was anywhere near you, or if or Chicago is anywhere near you. But if I've never done Baltimore, I've heard great things about Baltimore Comic Con, but I've never made it over there. And Dylan also mentioned that he's glad you're doing better. I am as well, Herman. You know, I'm glad you stay healthy, man. Once you stay healthy, you got to take care of yourself so you can keep making art. Let's see here. Let's see here. All right. I see. I already forgot what the comment was in relationship where James said that it was more rhetorical. But well, I hope whatever my answer was, because now I'm lost in the sauce. I've forgotten where we even left off because it's taken so long getting through all these comments. But I hope that it was whatever it was helpful as opposed to the opposite. It was helpful as opposed to confusing. All right. Herman says, I think it's obvious because you make a decision and keep on because you're doing everything and don't have a lot of time, especially when you make a deadline for yourself. Well, yeah, that's true. Oh, the question I think was in terms of personality and being likable and having a personality that makes people want to work with you. I mean, I think that being a good collaborator is important. Like you said, it was a rhetorical question, but coming back to that, I mean, I think that it's important, but I don't know if I've cultivated those skills as well as I'd like to because I enjoy having the control. Like my favorite creators tend to be writer artists that kind of do the whole thing themselves. Like, I mean, you look at Simonson, Frank Miller, John Byrne, Howard Chaykin. All of them are writer artists, and all of them have collaborated with other people. But also, my favorite works of them are where they kind of did it all, except maybe the lettering and the coloring. And I would probably, love to collaborate with a colorist, but I need to make sure I have the budget to properly compensate them because I wouldn't want anyone working for a percentage deal. I would want to pay them a page rate because they deserve it. Especially in this era, I think with digital color, like people have moved from calling them colorists to calling them color artists. And I don't think that colorist is a derogative term, but I think that in the past 20 years, 'cause it's been a while now, that color has been as powerful as it is. But when you went to that era when people were printing from pencils and having colorists having to figure out how to make these pencil drawings still look solid, I think that the printing quality and the digital tools have gotten to the point where I think color artists really have taken up a lot of the heavy lifting that was previously done by inkers in terms of really solidifying the look of a book, or finalizing, creating that final polish that pulls a book together. Lettering, I don't feel comfortable having someone letter my work because the lettering for me is part of the writing process. And to be honest, I find it very, very weird that there are not more writers who letter their own books. It really seems like it would, I think it would make writers, I think that's my biggest advice. If you're an indie writer who's looking to get into comics, I would say learn how to letter. Start lettering books. I feel like it would not just improve your craft, but your understanding of words and their real estate across the page and how word balloons act as a design element. I think it would help any writer see the page more visually. And for me, I really feel like I need to have my word balloons placed before I start doing my rough layouts. And I'm drawing around the area where I plan to have my balloons placed. And then I go back and I rewrite and then I move balloons around based on that. And I'll look at it and I'll decide, this is one of the reasons why I like doing the whole thing myself, is because I've mentioned this in the past. I can look at a page where there isn't a proper flow in terms of the dialogue and the balloons, but I can look at a page and say, all right, I need to rewrite this dialogue and either make it shorter, or I need to break it into 2 balloons and have 1 balloon in this page and 1 in the next. Or I can look at it and say, I really like the way the dialogue is flowing here. I'm going to change the art to match this. And maybe I need to merge two panels or break one panel into two just so I can keep the wording the way it is. And that's one of the things that I think would be more challenging, and it would cause other people to have to redo work they've already done if I either had somebody else lettering my work or if I'm drawing someone else's script. And so the whole idea of having the control to do that is just, it works better for me. And I feel like that's more respectful than trying to make other people redo shit to match my wonky brain moving things around. Let's see here. And Alpha Proto says, I remember those days where the pencils were painted over by the colorists. It's like, yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see that inking is still alive now. And even when it's people that are doing digital inking, you know, I like the feeling of the strong, crisp line work. And that doesn't mean I dislike things that are painted without inks. It's just, it's a stylistic choice, and some people do it well. And when it's done well, I like all styles. That's the thing. I'm not a hater of a particular style. I think that whether it's cartoony, realistic, painted, slick, digitally rendered, flat color, all of it can be beautiful. Like, I'm here for the entire comics buffet. I want to sample from every plate. I want to get in there. Hometown buffet comics. That's how I come at it. James says, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dust YouTube channel, but I recommend Recursive Dreams. I'm going to write that down and I'll look it up after the stream. I will check that out. And Alpha Proto says, you can write with the Marvel method when the writer letters letters the comic. That is true. That's true. You know, I mean, and it's weird because I kind of work by myself with sort of a hybrid of the Marvel method, except I don't just have a description of the whole story. I will break things down into page by page and panel by panel. But I do tend to do like, the thing is, I will write my dialogue. I'll still write out dialogue before I do it, but that dialogue is like about 50 to 60% placeholder. I always know that's going to need polish. It's going to need tweaking. It's going to need me also sometimes pulling out dialogue because I was able to sell it with the drawing. Yeah, the challenge really is whether the story is all told in the visuals. Because the whole thing with the Marvel method is that, you know, you give a summary of the story, you give it to the artist draws it, then you get the art back and you do the lettering on top. You know, in some cases, they may not leave space for dialogue for certain scenes. Ideally, if you're working Marvel method, you might still tell them that they're going to need to leave space for dialogue here. And our experienced artists will know to leave space in certain scenes for people to talk. But also, in the same way that like an actor can do a whole scene and they'll do it wordlessly and you can feel everything they're feeling, an artist will draw a page where they can feel, you can feel everything that's happening in that page. And you don't necessarily need dialogue. And that's, I've heard people like Scott Snyder talking about, that's one of the best feelings in the world when they look at the scene, the writer that the artist turned in the pages, and they're like, oh, I'm pulling like all of this dialogue out. It doesn't need it. I'm getting out of the way. They told the story, you know? I mean, and that's one of the places where, like, I don't want it to sound like I am anti-collaboration. I think that some of the best comics out there are when the artist and writer and the letter and colorist are working in concert and they're synced up. I'm talking more about my personality and my ability to do that. I don't think is developed. But I think that when it's done well, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. All right, guys, we have gone on way too long. All right. Well, on that note, if you enjoy these live streams, like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at substack.com/@Jeremy. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books or free digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can pick up my most recent comic book series, Morning Star. It's a retelling of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains a conclusion, issues 5 through 8. Check those out. And if you want to see, there are book flip-throughs on the homepage of my YouTube channel. If you scroll down to the flip-through section, you can see flip-throughs, what's inside the book. Check them out before you pick them up. Also, I mentioned earlier, next week we're going to do a drawing jam on Magma. If you're on my newsletter or if you want to get on that, head on over to Substack and sign up, and I will send out a request. You'll be able to message me directly on Substack if you want to get in on that. And for anyone who's a patron, you guys will get the invites through Patreon. So, all right, guys, again, thank you for the time, for hanging out, and all the great conversation. That's it for now. Go be creative.